Chapter 3. Beep, beep, beep. The sound was fuzzy and warbled, and it confused him greatly. The obnoxious sound steadily grew louder and became more pronounced as he slowly returned to consciousness. He cracked both eyelids open, his slitted pupils contracting when bright light assaulted his blurred vision. He groaned and closed them again, not sure if he was ready to return to the land of the living just yet, especially when fresh waves of pain racked his small body. He whimpered and sought desperately to escape it, wishing for that dark oblivion to overtake him again. Zikolov wasn't sure where he was or how he got there. The last thing he remembered, he was nearly killed. His father had carried him as tenderly and as carefully as his cyborg body would allow. Then everything had gone black. Knowing he was hopelessly awake now, the child blinked his eyes open again. "He is awake, sir," the voice of a medical droid droned emotionlessly to a big blur standing next to his bedside. His vision soon cleared and he could see that he was in a healing room. His arm and his chest were wrapped in bandages, and that incessant beeping was in fact a heart monitor of some kind. He saw the towering figure of his father standing over him. Grievous coughed once as if clearing his throat. "The Medi-droid says you are going to make a full recovery." "It hurts," the boy whispered softly. "True warriors feel no pain." Grievous ordered the medical droid to reduce administering pain medications. "He's just a child, Sheelal, where is your heart?" He only imagined the voice of Zikolov's mother and shook his head. This boy had to learn to be tough, for the denizens of the galaxy as well as Count Dooku would show him no mercy. "You have to be strong, Zikolov." The child had tears forming in his eyes and his chest began to heave, sure signs he was about to cry. "No whining or crying will be tolerated. If you disobey me, you will suffer." "But it hurts." The little one growled angrily, not understanding why it had to be this way. "Consider this a part of your training. The Jedi train their younglings from the age of 3. You are 6 years old now. You are more than ready to begin yours." The child remained quiet, knowing that what his father said was true. That didn't mean he had to like it. He crossed his arms gingerly across his injured chest and pouted, shooting his father a glare that spoke clearly of his distaste for the whole situation. "It's not fair." The child huffed defiantly. "There are many things in life that aren't fair. That is why you must learn to overcome them." Grievous raised a hand and clenched it into a fist to emphasize his point. More pain tore through him and he whimpered again. Tears began to fall unheeded and he looked up at his father with a pleading look that would break most hearts. "I told you no tears. As punishment, you will not be given your first meal." He reached a hand out in a desperate attempt to hold his father's hand. The cyborg took a step back and shook his head. "You must learn that I will not always be here to protect you. And that mercy is for the weak." The young Kalish was beginning to see a side to his father he had never seen before, and it scared him. This wasn't the same father that had cared for him down on Kali. This was different. And he hated it. "Father, please," he whispered coarsely. Grievous's eyes softened minutely and he took a hand and gently ran it through Zikolov's ebony hair. His hair had become slightly tangled and some of his braids had come undone during the fight with the Mew Mew. Once his injuries were healed enough, his son would need to bathe and prepare himself to meet the Count. The child, despite the pain, reached up, stretching his sore chest and grasped Grievous's large metallic hand. He hugged it gently, uncaring if he made the pain worse in his chest or not. He just needed to know that his father still loved him. "I love you, father." Grievous was silent for a long, agonizing moment and the child began to doubt that he would ever speak those words in kind. He then replied as softly as his vocabulator would let him. "I love you too, son." He pulled his hand away from the Kalish youngling and called one of his officers to the med ward. He gave instructions to the Nemodian crew member who was one of the few that was stationed on his ship. The Nemodian nodded in understanding and approached the young Kalish with a datapad. Grievous gestured at the uniformed officer and introduced him. "This is Captain Ferenzi. He will be your instructor for the day. Do as he asks. If I hear that you gave him any trouble, you will be punished. I will listen. Good. I will be back for you later. Grievous strode out of the medical ward and returned to his duties aboard his flagship. His son was going to be taught the basic things children his age learned before moving on to combat training. It wouldn't be much longer before they had to go and meet Count Dooku. Captain Ferenzi began instructing the child basic reading, mathematics, and writing skills. Zikolov caught on quickly, and teaching him was surprisingly easy. The boy thirsted for knowledge and he was eager to study. By the end of the day, this child had surpassed all of the peers in his own age group. He was eagerly advancing to the next level. Focusing on learning got young Zikolov's mind off of his body's pain. Soon the pain faded into a dull ache. He loved to learn, and once he made a mistake on something, he figured out how to correct the problem and never failed on that particular topic again. Hours flew by and he was so immersed in his studies that he completely forgot that his father was supposed to be picking him up right about now. He was just completing his final assignment when the loud, familiar clanking steps of his father's large geranium feet alerted him to his presence. His father looked at him for a moment and then at the captain. Your son has excelled in every subject and has surpassed all within his age group. This did not come as a surprise to the general. Most members in his family were highly intelligent and adapted quickly. Tomorrow I want you to continue his instruction. As you wish, my lord, the Nemodian bowed respectfully and left the two Kalish to converse in private. You have done well, Zikolov. Now it is time for you to rest. The youngling nodded tiredly and closed his eyes. His exhausted mind and broken body soon succumbed to sleep. Grievous stood and watched him for a moment, and when he was sure the boy was sleeping he left the room. There was a special errand he had to run, and he had to go back down to the surface of Kali to do it. The man with a silver beard and silver hair approached him with sharp-eyed scrutiny. He can wield the Force, that much is certain. There is something more I was hoping to find in this one. What would you like me to do with him, my lord? He cannot be allowed to become a Jedi. The risk is too high. You must execute him, immediately. Will you not train him as your new apprentice? I already have an apprentice. I cannot take another unless my current apprentice is slain. I do not foresee that as a possibility anytime soon. She is highly skilled. This boy has nothing promising to offer me. His talents, his skills are mediocre. Now I will not command you a second time. Kill him. Zikolov watched with wide eyes as his father argued with Count Dooku, trying his best to save him from what was to come. Count Dooku raised his hands and sent force lightning coursing through Grievous's cyborg body, eliciting an agonized scream. The boy was rageful and glared hatefully at the old man. Leave him alone. Count Dooku ceased his attack and chuckled humorlessly. Not to worry, young one. You are next. He ignited a crimson lightsaber and slowly approached him. Zikolov had a bad feeling and he knew what was about to happen. He backed away, raising a hand above his head as if to shield himself, and awaited that horrible fate. An invisible force shoved him across the room, and when he tried to get back up, he saw the old man sailing through the air to land right next to him. He shoved his crimson blade through his chest and Zikolov screamed. He heard his father's anguished and rage-filled shouts from across the room, and a white light filled his vision, and then everything went black. Father! Zikolov screamed in fright as he bolted upright in bed. That simple action caused him great pain. He was panting and sweat soaked his clothes. The very real, vivid nightmare replayed over and over in his mind. The medical droid immediately came to his side. Is everything all right, sir? The very strong, compelling need to tell his father overrode the pain. Where is my father? He left the ship to return to the planet's surface, but he should be back within the hour. Zikolov nodded and then leaned back against the pillows and tried to relax. That was hard to do when he felt so impatient. To his great relief, his father returned sooner than expected, carrying a small crate. Tekka was also with him. The nightmare was still fresh in his mind, So he shoved the covers back and struggled to get off of the medical berth, ignoring the droid that told him to stay in bed. "Father, I have to tell you something." Grievous handed the crate to Tekar and immediately went to his side. He stopped his son's determined struggle to get down and helped him back into bed. "What is so important that you risk hurting yourself?" The child shivered and drew blankets up to his chest. He stared his father right in the eyes and explained. "He killed me." "Who killed you?" The general thought that maybe his son was talking about the Mew Mew. That was not the case, he soon learned. It was a man with silver hair, on his face and head. He had a red glow sword and he stabbed me with it. He told you to kill me but you said you wouldn't, so he sent lightning bolts at you and then killed me after he hurt you. This took Grievous by complete surprise. How could the child have dreamt about Count Dooku when he'd never even met him? Did the Force have something to do with that? "Everything is fine, Zikalov. No one is going to hurt you." Grievous was very cautious with this information. What if his son's dream was a premonition of what could happen? Such a thing was not unheard of. The child was sobbing now, terrified. Grievous did something then he hadn't done in years. It took him by surprise. He sat on the bed next to his son and allowed the boy to hug him. He gently stroked his head and spoke soft words of comfort. Maybe he wasn't heartless after all. That didn't mean everyone else in the galaxy had to know that. He ordered Tekar not to breathe a word of that display of affection to anyone, promising him death if he broke his vow, and sent the droids that were present in the room to go and get their memories wiped. The boy sniffled and looked up at him worriedly. "I don't want that scary man to hurt you." Grievous chuckled. "It's not easy for anyone to hurt me, least of all him." The Kaleesh cyborg then helped the boy down from the bed and told the child to follow him. He took him around the corner, down the corridor and into a dark room on the right. Once they entered, automatic lights triggered on and Grievous showed the child his vast collection of lightsaber trophies. "Count Dooku has one, perhaps 2 lightsabers at most. I can wield 4 at any given time. I've been trained and know nearly every Jedi lightsaber form and technique on record." Grievous couldn't help but brag a little, especially when it was the truth. Father and son crossed the hall into a training room and Grievous ordered his son to stay put on the sidelines. He then split his arms into 4 and activated 4 lightsabers. He twirled them in a dazzling display and then began to fight 4 Magna Guards simultaneously. In minutes, he had defeated them all and laughed triumphantly. "See, boy? No one is going to hurt me." His arms merged into 2 and he clipped the lightsabers to his hip. "And I will never let anyone kill you while you are still young and defenseless. Someday soon you will grow to be a warrior and won't ever have to face this fear again." The 2 returned to the medical wing where Tekar waited patiently for them. Grievous gestured for Tekar to explain. The Kaleesh tribesman pulled a small Mew Mew skull out of the crate and handed it to Zikalov. "This is the Mew Mew that you killed. It is tradition for our people to make war masks and cloaks out of the beasts we have slain. I will teach you how to do that very thing." Grievous left Tekar and his son to get to work crafting those items and returned to the bridge. 5 hours later, Zikalov with Tekar's help put his finishing touches on his mask. There were some tools he was too young to use, so he had to tell the tribesman what he wanted. He held the finished products proudly and held them up for Tekar to inspect. He nodded with a smile. "I think you are ready to show your father." The child nodded with a bright smile and pulled his mask on. He fastened the beige cloak made from the Mew Mew pelt around his throat and Tekar handed him the Mew Mew bone knife he had used to kill the animal, now cleaned and disinfected, to the boy. The 6-year-old took it and held it in admiration. "Well, Zikalov, you have earned the respect of our people. You are probably one of the youngest Kaleesh we have ever seen who has not only survived an encounter with a Mew Mew but slain one as well. You should be proud." Zikalov smiled beneath the mask and slowly walked with Tekar out of the med ward. Passing droids paid them no heed, although a couple of the B-1 battle droids would stare silently at the warrior child curiously before continuing on their way. They reached the bridge where Grievous was just finishing speaking with one of the maintenance droids. The droid left to carry out his orders, and the general turned to see Tekka and his son waiting silently for his approval. He gestured for Zikalov to approach him, and once the boy did, he took great care in circling around him, inspecting him from head to toe. Grievous was satisfied with the outcome of his son's project and congratulated him. "You have earned great respect, child. You are now a warrior. Once the medical droid releases you from custody, your combat training will begin." Grievous dismissed Tekka after thanking him for his help and knelt down and placed 2 hands on Zikalov's shoulders and stared into his golden eyes. "You should know, boy, that your father is proud of you." The child smiled. "Thank you." The Separatist general began to escort his son back to the medical wing. After a few minutes, he noticed that Zikalov was holding a hand to his chest and was having a difficult time walking. He picked him up and carried him the rest of the way. It seemed as soon as the child's head hit the pillow, he was out like a light. Grievous carefully removed the Mew Mew mask from the boy's head and gently took the knife out of his small hand and placed them on a nearby countertop for him to retrieve the following day. He left instructions for the Medi-droid to make sure his son was fed upon awakening. He returned to the bridge. They were running out of time. Soon they could delay no longer. He had to prepare his son for the meeting with Count Dooku. His son's nightmare was not forgotten, and in some ironic way, Grievous's own fears had manifested in the boy's dreams. He stood in silent contemplation for the longest time, ignoring the bustle of the droids around him. His golden eyes narrowed and then hardened in firm resolve. If Dooku ordered him to kill his son, Grievous already knew what his answer would be. If he had to kill the old man to keep his son safe, then by the gods he would. He knew that defeating Dooku would be difficult if he was ever forced into that conflict. The Sith Master was powerful and his lightsaber skills rivaled his own. It was Dooku that taught him everything he knew about lightsaber combat. His only hope was that someday he, not the old man, would pass on his knowledge to his youngest child. In 3 days' time, they would know the boy's future. And ultimately, his fate. Chapter 4. 3 days passed rather quickly and the Malevolence traveled through hyperspace heading for a very fateful destination. Thanks to Bacta treatments, Zikalov was almost fully healed. He was pretty sore, but the pain was finally gone. He continued to study under Captain Ferenzi's tutelage. His father was busy doing whatever it was that he did, so he didn't see him that often. The child was happy when Grievous visited him later that evening. He was just climbing into bed when he came to wish him a good night. The general stood in the doorway, blocking out the light from the hallway. "Make sure you rest well. Tomorrow we meet the Count." The child pulled the covers up to his stomach but didn't lie down. He wanted to ask his father for something he'd never had before. "Father?" "Yes? Could you tell me a story about when you first became a warrior?" Grievous was caught off guard. His son wanted a bedtime story. His first impulse was to tell the child no and to go to sleep. He stood there silently and studied Zikalov. His son stared back at him with a hopeful look, small hands clutching his blankets tightly in anticipation of his answer. There was just something about this boy that appealed to his better nature, and the father in him was happy to oblige his request. "I will tell you only one story and then you must go to sleep." Zikalov smiled brightly at him and nodded enthusiastically. "I promise." The young Kalish patted a small hand on the bed as an invitation for him to come and sit beside him. Grievous walked over and joined his son on the bed, sitting at the child's feet. He stared off into space, deep in thought. He looked back at the child and sighed, the sigh coming out more like a growl. "After the accident, I lost part of my memory. I'm not sure I can remember that far back." "Just try. I bet you remember more than you think." The general drummed his metal fingers against his thigh plating as he tried to recollect, if only for his son's benefit. He had fragments of memory and it was really hard trying to put the pieces together. He remembered one event, some of it vague and the rest perfectly clear as if it happened yesterday. He chuckled and turned to look at his son who was waiting eagerly for him to begin the tale. Many years ago, a young Kalish boy who was a few years older than you, wanted desperately to prove himself a warrior. So late one night while everyone was sleeping, he snuck off into the jungle armed with only a shony spear. The child remembered seeing a spear in his father's house. Was that the same one? He borrowed the weapon from his father, without his permission. Grievous glared at the child in warning and pointed a clawed digit at him. A horrible punishment will await you if you do that. That's what the boy in the story learned sometime later. Zikalov nodded in obedience and then lied down, still absorbed in his father's story. A small yawn escaped him. He ran deeper and deeper into the forest, splashing through a stream, and stopped when he heard it. The child's eyes widened. What did he hear? Grievous leaned in closer to the boy's face and chuckled darkly. He heard nothing. Zikalov shuddered visibly when he recognized where this story was going. He lived it once already. The Kalish boy knew that danger was closing in. Twigs snapped and he lowered his spear, preparing for the fight of his life. What was it? The child gasped. It was a karabak that leapt out of the bushes right at him. He jumped out of the way, just barely, and the creature managed to cut his leg with one of the sharp horns on its head. The wounded boy had a hard time fighting it. He used the spear to shove it off of him and knocked it back a few feet. He almost didn't get back up in time. Grievous paused for dramatic effect. What happened next? Zikalov bounced on the bed excitedly. He rolled aside and held his spear up, knowing that he had only one chance to kill the beast. If he missed, he was dead. Another yawn, this one bigger than the last, escaped the child, and he blinked sleepily, struggling to stay awake. Grievous noticed and inwardly smiled. He continued his riveting tale. So he took aim, and just as the karabak leapt at him, the spear flew out of his hand. Did he kill it? The spear hit its mark. The beast died instantly as the weapon pierced its heart. He knew he had to bring proof back to his village that he had survived and killed his first real predator single-handedly. Otherwise, no one would believe him. I'd believe you, Zikalov mumbled softly, his eyelids growing heavy. Yes, but to have physical proof earns you greater respect. So, the boy used his spear to cut vines down from a nearby tree and dragged his prize back to his village. It was a long and dangerous journey, and the howls of a pack of Mew grew ever nearer. He returned home just as the sun was rising, and his father came out of the house and saw his son holding his spear proudly with a dead karabak at his feet. The boy earned great respect that day, and it was then that he became a warrior. Grievous looked down at his son, who was fast asleep. He carefully pulled the covers up to his chin, careful not to disturb his rest. When was the last time he tucked in one of his children? It had been too long. Speaking of which, Count Dooku refused to reveal the location of his family. He didn't like that one bit. The old man was up to something. The general would deal with that when the time came. Right now he had to rest himself. Grievous returned to his command chair on the bridge and closed his eyes, drifting between waking and sleeping. Count Dooku circled around him like a Phyrexian shark. The boy could feel the darkness emanating from him. He didn't trust the old man one bit. So, you can see the future, can you, boy? Perhaps you aren't as worthless as I thought. He stopped circling him and stood in front of him, towering over the child. Zikalov looked up at him distrustfully and felt very cautious. Prove to me that you can see the future, child. And I will spare your life. Dooku, fast as lightning, backhanded the boy and knocked him down. He tissed the youngling and ignited his lightsaber. You should have foreseen that. What a pity. He swung his crimson blade, bringing it down on him. Zikalov woke up screaming. His sweat-soaked pajamas stuck to his skin and he was panting, trying to calm his racing heart. He slid out of bed and small feet pitter-pattered across the pristine floor as he made his way out of the room and into the hallway. He shivered, suddenly cold, but ignored the sensation. There was only one person he wanted to see. He stopped a passing B-1 battle droid. Where is my father? The entire crew was made aware of his presence on board the ship. General Grievous commanded the droids to treat his son with complete respect and to consider him as a junior officer unless they wanted to face his wrath. The general is on the bridge. Please take me to him. Roger, Roger. The B-1 battle droid gestured for the boy to follow him. They walked down a few different corridors and then entered an elevator that took them up to the bridge. He walked out with the droid and sighed with relief to see his father sitting serenely in his chair. He walked up to him and grabbed his clawed hand gently. Father? Grievous looked down at him with confusion. Why are you awake? You should be sleeping. I had a dream about that scary man. He killed me again. He had another nightmare about Count Dooku? Grievous was very interested in hearing about the dream. He used a clawed hand to carefully guide his son over so that he was standing in front of him. Tell me in great detail, what happened? The child recounted as vividly as he could what had been said and what had happened in the very realistic dream. When he finished, he waited silently to see what his father had to say. Grievous seemed to be digesting what he had revealed. He lifted his son up and sat him on his knee. When we meet the Count tomorrow, say nothing of these dreams. Let me do the talking. The child nodded his head in understanding. Okay, father. Grievous moved to set his son back down on the floor, but the child clung stubbornly to him. Please, let me stay with you. You need to sleep, Zekalov. He looked up at him with pleading, golden eyes and shivered, but not from the cold. I'm scared. Grievous scoffed. True warriors aren't afraid of anything. Just for a few minutes. The child begged him. Grievous noticed that most of his droid crew had stopped their routine activities to observe the escalating argument. He snarled at them angrily. Get back to work. They obediently did as ordered, none of them paying father and son a second glance. Zekalov tried desperately to win his father over. He didn't want to go back to the eerie dark of his room all alone. He was mostly scared of having another nightmare. Father, I don't want that scary man to come back and kill me when I sleep again. Grievous growled in frustration. There is nothing to be scared of. It was just a dream. The child looked down at the floor with tears forming in his eyes. It's a bad feeling I have, like, it's going to happen. He won't kill you. The child looked up at him with a hopeful expression when he heard the strong conviction in Grievous's voice. Are you sure? Grievous laughed. I won't let him. You promise? The cyborg Kalish nodded solemnly. Yes. I promise. Before the father could protest, the boy gave him a hug. The general glanced around quickly and saw that the droids were all too preoccupied in their work to notice. Good. The child sat in his lap comfortably and leaned against him and yawned tiredly. When Zekalov Quilamek Shilal was this tired, he was cuddly. Sitting with his father made him feel safe. Grievous was bewildered and didn't quite know what to do with the child. The general wasn't soft. He was the supreme commander of the droid armies and a general no less. He was a fearless Kalish turned cyborg warlord who slaughtered Jedi both for fun and out of necessity, a cunning and ruthless strategist that inspired fear within all who opposed him. And he had come undone by this child. If word of this got out, his reputation was a steaming pile of poodoo. He moved slightly about to force his son to return to his room, the command stuck in his throat when he awoke the half-asleep youngling. He mentally cursed and remained still, allowing his son to cuddle with him just this once. It didn't take long for the boy to succumb to his exhaustion. Grievous carefully picked the child up and carried him back to his room. After putting him back in bed, he turned to leave and stopped mid-step when an innocent, sleep-filled voice spoke softly in the dark of the room. Father, will you stay with me? This child was beginning to frustrate and annoy him. It was taking every ounce of patience not to snap on the boy. I allowed you to sit with me on the bridge far longer than you should have. He walked back over, stood beside his son and looked down at him. You are a warrior now. You must learn to face your fears. Next time Dooku tries to kill you, Fight back. But he has a red glow sword. Lightsaber. Grievous corrected him. He's bigger than me. That Mew Mew was a little bigger than you and you killed it. What did you feel when it attacked you? Zekalov shuddered at the memory. I was scared. Yes, and what did you feel the moment you struck back at it? The child thought about it for a moment. I really wanted to live. I didn't want it to kill me. And do you feel the same when Dooku tries to kill you? The boy felt ashamed and shook his head. No, I'm always just scared. I'm too scared to fight. You can overcome your fear. The day you understand what it means to truly be a warrior, you'll never fear again. I don't want to meet Dooku. The child buried himself under the blankets. Grievous growled in exasperation. Then he got an idea. Wait here, I'll be right back. He left the room and went down the hall and entered his trophy room. He found what he was looking for and grabbed the hilt of the weapon and returned to his son's bedside. He pressed the button on the hilt and a yellow blade emerged. He touched the blade against his wrist and it bounced harmlessly off of his geranium armor, leaving no damage. He wasn't sure why he kept this useless one around. A Jedi Master had it in his possession the day he killed him. It was fortunate that he had it now. This is a training lightsaber. It can't seriously injure you, but it can hurt if you turn it to the highest setting. Grievous pointed out a small control dial on the hilt. He turned it and the hum of the blade grew louder, indicating it was on a higher setting. He turned it off and handed it to his son. This is yours now. I will teach you how to use it later. For right now, use it to fight Dooku in your dreams. The boy hugged the training weapon to his chest and smiled. This had to be the best gift his father had ever given him. Thank you, Father. Good night. He got comfortable and closed his eyes. Good night, son. Zekalov fell asleep almost instantly, the training saber laying on the nightstand next to the bed. Grievous left the room, feeling confident his son would have no trouble sleeping that night. Tomorrow morning when they met the Count, father and son would have to face their fears together. Grievous hoped that it was only just a dream.